Hello, friends. This is Boone Christensen here, and it is Saturday, and today we are going to talk about sex. I've had enough people ask me some particular questions about sex, about drives, and how dissociation and mental illness play into it. I think that this video um, is appropriately timed. We're going to go ahead and look at a simple PowerPoint that I made, cleverly called Sex in 3D, or rather the 3Ds. So we'll go ahead and get this show going. So sex in 3Ds. And what are the 3Ds? We are looking at drive, dissociation, and differentiation, and we'll get a better understanding of what those three terms mean as we go along here. Um, these ideas, I must put a disclaimer, are my own ideas. The concept of drive, sex drive, is not actually well defined in scientific literature. It's often defined as like the number of thoughts or intensity of feelings or the number of sexual behaviors. Uh, but the definition itself is actually very much open to debate. And so a lot of the things that I'm going to share with you today are, are based in scientific concepts, but like many things in the sex therapy world are my own interpretation of these underlying concepts. So just throwing that out there. And we'll start with the controversial question, is sex a need? And can somebody say that their needs are not getting met if they are not having sex? Um, in the most basic form of this question, if we are to interpret need as something like food, water, or shelter, something that your body needs to survive, then the answer is a clear no. We do not need sex to survive. And that is, it's apparently obvious in the many people who live celibate lives, either as Buddhist monks or as priests, as single individuals, or as married individuals where there is no sex. Right? We know it is a fact that people can go for many, many years and even their entire lives without sex or orgasms, and they don't die because of it. Then there's the other question of whether or not sex can influence our sense of well-being. And that is an obvious yes, right? We obviously have feelings of pain or sadness or loneliness that can be remedied with sex. We can derive validation from sex. We can use sex as a medication. And like there are moments where some people feel like they will die without sex. Um, and we'll look at these two constructs of addiction and validation as some of those more extreme ways that sex affects our sense of well-being. So let's look at our definition of addiction for our purposes here, which is sex and or other sexual stimuli such as masturbation or porn that are used as a medication that relieves pain. And most of the time, or I don't see too many cases of people trying to relieve physical pain with sex, which they can do, because sex releases natural endorphins that do kill pain. Most of the time, it is to treat emotional pain. And over time, our brains and bodies learn how to efficiently use this medication to the point that it overrides our willpower, which is what might cause it to be an addiction, meaning that it can start to disrupt other important functions or goals in our lives. So, yes, I do believe in the concept of sex addiction, though there are other scholars out there who do not, and I have yet to understand that argument. And then there is sex for validation, where you use partnered sex to bolster your self-esteem or your sense of lovability. It neutralizes your shame, not with not with an opiate, not with something that relieves pain, but it helps you feel secure. It helps you feel safe. And so over time, people can learn to conflate the ideas of validation or their sense of self-worth with sex. And this can cause some issues later on. So I'd like to discuss how our different emotional states affect our receptivity or our desire for sex. But before we get to the direct definitions and relationships there, I'd like to use an analogy of chocolate cake, right? Something that is delicious, that most people like, and I think it is not a basic need, but can also become an addiction. And so I'd like to analogize our chocolate cake here. So we're looking at the um, six different section or emotional states, right? And remember that these sections, according to the U model, they don't actually represent brain parts. They represent different states that we can be in. Though the like logic, fight, flight, or freeze actually do correspond to brain parts. Um, but we're going to start with the dissociative logical state. This is the state that we go into when our emotions have been totally shut down and do not serve any meaningful purpose for us, right? So we can develop this robotic, productive state. It's a state that many of us go into when we go into work during the week. And what does this state care about in terms of chocolate cake? Right? This state is always looking for what is the most useful thing for me, right? Um, what utilitarian benefits can I derive from chocolate cake? And the answer is you can get calories from chocolate cake. I'll have the cake to get the calories, but it doesn't bear any other meaning besides that for the dissociative logical state. And then as we get down into the dissociative emotional state, dissociative fight or flight, we might use that cake in order to relieve our anxiety or our pain. This is where stress eating to cope, comes into play. And we will use that cake in order to get us back up to the dissociative logical state, which is kind of like numb and emotionless, but functional and feels safe. Or you might have entered the dissociative emotional state because the cake was a trigger. Maybe you have some sort of cake related or chocolate related trauma that sends you into that, that strong emotional state when you face the stimulus of the cake. Or maybe you got food poisoning, right? So the sight of cake just kind of makes you sick. As we enter into the freeze state, the depressive state, that cake looks fairly irrelevant because down there, nothing tastes good, right? Remember, we only have our heart and our lung functions uh, working, still highly efficiently down in the bottom part of our brain. So our intestines, our digestive tracts, those things are kind of frozen up, not super not highly used down in that depressive state. And so if we were to eat that cake, it would just feel bad. We'd kind of feel like we were forcing ourselves to eat it, and it would just feel heavy and gross in our stomachs if we were to eat it down at the very bottom of freeze. But as we steadily move up to the other side, to the more associated or mindful sense of anxiety, emotion, anger, sadness, then that cake might help us recover. It might help us feel safe enough to move through our emotions faster. And it might feel good after a good cry. And then what about that mindful logical state? This is where the chocolate cake experience is at its best, where you can sit there and you can enjoy the cake. You can pay attention to the taste and the quality, and you can pay attention to the quantity that you're eating rather than just eating it anxiously and just to derive whatever medication you can from it. You can you can enjoy the cake in context of company, right? Whatever setting you happen to be sitting in. And importantly, if you don't get your chocolate cake in this state, you might feel some sadness about that. It's like, oh man, I really, I really would have liked some chocolate cake. But if I don't have it, that's gonna be okay. You don't feel deep anger or shame about it, which is what you would feel over in the dissociated emotional state, where like if you feel like you need the cake, but you're not getting the cake, you're gonna feel deprived. You're gonna feel neglected, or you might feel very angry or violated if you don't get that cake because your body really feels like it needs it. down in that dissociated emotional state. So I'm sure you probably already started making the comparison with sex as we've been going through this, but we'll go ahead and be more concrete at this moment. So going back up to the dissociated logical state, sex, what sex does in this state is, it serves a utilitarian purpose. Right? I'm going to have sex right now because maybe it'll help me sleep or it'll help appease my partner, right? And like maybe I'll get a little bit of pleasure out of it, but mostly doing sex to check it off the list, right? As something I'm kind of supposed to do, or something that I need to do to keep the system moving, but not because sex really means anything. And then, if you are feeling stressed, you're feeling panicked, you're feeling anxious, then you might need sex as a form of pain relief, something to relieve the anxiety. Or if you're feeling insecure or low self-esteem, then you might use sex to try and boost that. Either way, it's the goal is to try and send you back up into that dissociated, logical, secure state. Or you may, or a sexual stimulus may have sent you into the dissociated emotional state due to some sort of negative association. Sexual trauma is one of the reasons why someone might enter into that state and thus have a very strong aversion, like a non-rational extreme aversion to sex at that point. As we move down into the freeze mode or the depressive state, sex just doesn't feel relevant. It is irrelevant. It doesn't sound fun. Like there's not a lot of blood flow or energy going into my reproductive organs anyway. Like it's just, remember, just heart and lungs down there. And so sex would likely feel violating in this state, because the body does not want it. And so, and this is the state that perpetrators try and get their victims into, right? They try and get their victims to freeze so they can't defend themselves. And this is why sexual assault is um, why it's so damaging, because it is really forcing someone to be defenseless in order for it to happen. Though it is technically possible to bring a body to orgasm in this state, the orgasm doesn't feel pleasurable. It feels like it's more like getting shocked with a car battery, right? You can use pornography or medication or stimulating of certain body parts to make the physiological orgasm happen, but it just feels bad. Remember, kind of like that, like chocolate cake just feels icky and gross, and and like I was forced to eat it. As we move up through to the mindful side of the fight or flight, sex might be used for some assurance, right? Something you already felt safe enough to move through that freeze mode, and maybe you've had your good cry, and at this point, sex provides some assurance. It is a sign of love. It is a sign of commitment. It feels good, but is also not doesn't feel absolutely necessary, right? Just something that could help move us up the river a bit. And then as we enter the mindful logical state, again, this is where sex means the most, where we can get the most out of it, where we can pay attention to the details. We can pay attention to the quality and the quantity of it, and balance that so that it feels right. We can enjoy it. And if we don't get it and we're in this state, then it might make us feel a little bit sad, but we're not going to panic and we're not going to blow up out of anger because it doesn't feel violating, because sex doesn't feel like a biological need up in that mindful logical state. So, what about these questions of high drive and low drive? I have been highly dissatisfied with what I've heard in the sex therapy research and community about this issue here. I think they highly mischaracterize what this is, mostly attributing it to like biology, that somebody is just like naturally or born high drive and somebody is naturally born low drive. And I don't think that makes much sense because I've seen people fluctuate so much according to circumstances. So obviously there are biological factors here. right? Genetics may play a role, but we just don't know very much about that. So I don't think it's appropriate for us to like try and comment on that because the science hasn't come up with that yet. Obviously, there are times of the month, especially for women, like ovulation is a period where your body is going to ask for sex more. There are times of the year, which incidentally for humans is entering the winter season, right? This is where we start to spend more time indoors with people, where there's probably less to do and you're looking to get warm. It's not like the other animals who tend to conceive more in the spring. So this is what we see in humans. There are life stages, obviously in adolescence, puberty, where our sexual functions really start to grow and mature and continue on into young adulthood. And then generally over the lifespan, we see sex drive decrease in men, but in premenopausal women, this is like late 30s through the 40s, that the body kind of says like this is kind of our last chance to reproduce, and thus we might see sex drive increase in women during that time period. And then of course, like eating healthy, exercising, getting enough sleep, these things affect every single bodily function, and of course your sexual functions as well. But what about but what about that discrepancy between high drive and low drive? I'll describe to you what I've seen amongst couples that I've worked with here. If we have two people in that like highly dissociated but logical state, right? Just highly functional people, not super emotional, like things are stable for them. They're kind of those once a weekers, that they have sex once a week, not because they really feel like they need it, but they're kind of supposed to. It's what married couples do, and it mostly feels good, so why not? But they're not really craving sex, and it doesn't feel that much for them anyway. It's kind of like mutual masturbation. Um, or we might have, say, one partner down in the dissociated emotional state where they feel like they really need sex, and then the other partner up in the logical dissociated where they're like, okay, like I'll do it to appease that partner, right? And I'll do that once or twice a week, just so this person can get their fix. In most cases, it is the man who is the higher drive partner and really feels the need for sex. Um, and they complain of a lower drive female partner. And I find that that low drive is often a result of either trauma, because women are much more likely to be sexually abused than men are, or because the woman is depressed, right? Her functions just aren't working. Sex feels irrelevant. There are so many other important things um, that she just doesn't care about sex. And why is it that men tend to enter this state more where they feel like they need sex? I don't think it has anything to do with the idea that men are just inherently more sex driven. Um, like we see that in the research that men like tend to have more sexual thoughts, feelings, and engage in sexual behaviors, but we don't have any causal explanations for that. But I think one of the important explanations is that women in society are more able to work through their emotions verbally and to have emotional intimacy both with other women and with men. It is okay for women to express their emotions, but it is much harder for a man to feel safe to express his vulnerable emotions of sadness or anxiety. And so when a man runs into a sexual stimulus like pornography, um, that helps to relieve that pain, I think we're much more likely to see a sexual addiction in a man than a woman. That doesn't mean they don't exist. Obviously, I do see women in my practice who are addicted to sex and to pornography. It does happen, but less often than with men. And so, anything else I need to say about these high drive, low drive? And again, I gave just kind of anecdotal experience here. Like these can be both men and women in any of these categories. Um, but I guess one thing more to say is that I don't like the idea of negotiating like sexual quotas. I don't really like the idea of scheduled sex because I don't like the idea of obligating anyone to have sex. This may just be my personal opinion as a couples therapist, but I don't think anyone should be obligated ever to have sex. And I find that when people do feel obligated, it is more likely to build up resentment. It is more likely to poison both the relationship and the sexual component of the relationship over time if someone feels obligated. And so the state that we are going for, this concept that we'll read a lot in, um, I'm forgetting the author's name at this point, but he talks a lot about differentiation, which is a state of high self-worth and emotional regulation and authenticity that is not like, and the emotional regulation is not determined by your partner's emotional state or ability to engage sexually. And this is what we could define as true love, meaning that you're with this person and you're having sex with this person because you want to, not because you feel like you need to in order to bolster your self-esteem. Differentiation is not a sense of apathy because you have full access to your emotional range, because you're able to feel grief, because you are able to feel love, um, and you're able to feel secure enough to be vulnerable, right? This is why differentiation is not robotic, non-emotional apathy. And then I think last thing to go over is to remember that all of these states go on a spectrum, right? It's not that you're either dissociated or associated, right? All these things exist on a spectrum. And as we do our therapy work, we're going to move through all of these states multiple times, right? And we're steadily going to increase the amount of association of each of them. So just letting us know that it's not a one-time thing. It is an ongoing process, and none of us might ever reach that enlightened, totally differentiated state, but we can spend our whole lives trying. So um, hopefully this was helpful for you. I'd love to hear your questions in session or for you to contact me in some other way. Uh, we need to talk about sex more. Okay. And I think the more we talk about it, the fewer problems we'll have with it. Thanks so much.